All right, in this video, we are going to take our idea of a component and actually create a component. We're going to create some JavaScript that will build a component dynamically for us, which we can then add to the DOM ourselves. So going back to the example in our last video, we have this button component here, right? We have some HTML for it, we have some CSS for it, and we have some JavaScript for it. So let's actually go through and create this button programmatically. First thing we need to understand, and we've talked about this in one of our previous lessons, is that we can't programmatically change CSS, right? So we can't add CSS, we can't add to our CSS from the DOM. We can add styles, which are inline styles in our HTML, but we can't add CSS from the DOM. So the CSS that we create, the styles that we want, we could add those on our inline styles. We know inline styles have some caveats to them, right? They're ultra specific. Not really reusable, but we can write these CSS classes and this in our CSS and then add it and remove it as we want from the DOM using, our class list and add and remove from that. So the CSS we're going to leave alone. But let's just start by talking about, and let's actually comment out some of that JavaScript. Let's start by talking about how we create brand new elements using JavaScript. All right. Think to yourself, how do you create a brand new element with JavaScript? How do I create something that's going to look like it goes on the HTML? Give you a second. If you said document create element, you're correct. So create element, remember, is going to create a brand new element, and it's going to live in memory right now, right? So if I say create element, and this is a method, and then I give it a string, and I give it the element I want to create. If I want to create an H1, I just tell it to create an H1. Okay, so now this has created an H1. It is floating in browser memory right now, not doing anything to it. So if I wanted to create a button, I would just say create element, and I would give it button. Okay, so this is creating a brand new button, right? So we have this brand new button, and I want to get access to it. Now it's still going to be in memory until I add it to the DOM, but I want access to it. I want to be able to manipulate it, control it, and then add it to the DOM. So let me say let, and I'm going to say button, even though I said button up here. This is commented out, so we're just going to create a new button. And then I'm going to say document create element button. Let's just console log this real quick and see what we get. We'll open up our console, and we just get what looks to be an HTML button, right? So we have a brand new item, and notice I don't see that button anywhere on the screen. So we can kind of think of create element as a selector as well, right? In that we now have access to this element. So we can do whatever we would do to a DOM element if it was selected, that we can do to this create element, right? So I can say something like button.text content equals, let's do this is a button component, right? So now we have console logged that button element with this is a button component text inside of it. Awesome. So we can do, like I said, whatever we want. What's one thing we need to do to make this exact component? Think to yourself, what's the next thing you would do? If you said that we should add these classes, that would be my next logical step, would be to add these classes to it, right? So let's go button.ClassList.add, and let's add the button class to it. So now you'll see that we have a button class on there. And let's do another class, class list add, and we'll say large button. And now we have both. This looks, I'm not gonna lie, exactly like this, right? Before we add those, let's come in here. No, let's keep those on there. Okay, so now we have this brand new button, right? We don't have it on the page yet. Let's actually comment this out. We don't have anything on the page yet, right? So we want to add it to the page. How do we add this button to our page? Let's see that our button 10 was at the very bottom. It was the last thing, the last element in this container. So what we need to do is we need to grab the parent. We need to grab that container. So let's go, what container? I'm going to use query selector. You can use get element by class name if you'd like. I'm going to use query selector standalone, not all, because we only want the first item on there. And then I'm going to say container dot append child. And I'm going to add that new button that we created right into there. Let's check it out. And there we go. So I'm going to delete this completely. It's not in our HTML anymore. There's no button in our HTML. Yeah, there we go. We've got it on the page, right? So let's go take a look at that code again. What I've done was I've used create element to create a new button element. Okay, remember this button element is kind of just floating in space. It doesn't have a home yet. I'm going to change the text content or add text content to it. And remember, I can do anything I want. Class lists. We're going to do an event listener right now. Text content, inner HTML, style, whatever you do, attributes. You can do that to a create element, right? We're just changing the element. We're adding and removing things from the element. Then I'm going to grab the parent, which is the container, and I'm going to append child. What if I said prepend on here? It would pop in the top, right? We wouldn't have one at the bottom. Okay, so get familiar with that append child and prepend. I don't know why they didn't keep it standard and say append or prepend or append child and prepend child, but it's append child and prepend. Okay, so I'm going to close our console. We now see that we're creating a new button. And we're missing one thing about this button, right? And that's the functionality. We want that alert to pop up to tell us that it's the button, right? So we can do that. We can actually essentially just take the old, what we had up there. I'm gonna get rid of that. And I'm just going to paste that in. It's the old functionality. Oh, we want to do just regular button at this point, not for each yet. There we go. So I've added an event listener to this button. It's going to listen for a click, and when it clicks, it's going to pop up an alert and tell us the button click says, and it's going to give us the text content of that button, right? So now we can click this, and we see this is a button component. Cool. So we've taken it off of the HTML, and now we've created a brand new button here. This works really well, right? We've created a new button. We've created a button component, right? I can take this and say, again, right? And we can see that it's going to change based on the data we give it. So think to yourself, like, we've used the DOM, and we've done this before, right? We've used the DOM to create a new element and put it on the page. But is this dry? I'll give you a moment to think about that. Is this dry? And if the answer is no, well, it could be yes, right? If we only ever want to create one button ever, it could be dry, right? If we're not repeating ourselves anywhere. But what happens if we want to add a second button? Well, if we want to add a second button, then we need to do something like this, right? We need to go that. We need to come in here and instead of button, we need to say button 2. Let's still see. Button 2, button 2, button 2, button 2, button 2. Add to append child. Or are we getting an error at? Let's clear that. Let's see where our error lies. It's not even appending it to the screen right now. Button 2, create button. Oh, I didn't. I'm not appending both of them. So let's go. All right. So now we have 2 buttons on the screen. Well, this is a whole mess of repeated code, right? That code is almost identical to this code. So this is JavaScript. What can we use in JavaScript in order to modularize all of this code? If the answer that you just said out loud is function, we can create a function that does this for us. That's the right answer. Okay, so I'm going to delete that second button. And let's come up here and create a JavaScript function. And I'm going to call this button creator. And I'm going to take all of this code. I'm going to put it inside of the button creator here. And we're going to manipulate it a little bit, but let's just take it all and put it in there. Okay. Let's talk about this. So we have a function called button creator. What this function is going to do is it's going to create a new button. It's going to add some text content to it. It's going to add a class list. It's going to add a class to its class list. It's going to add 2 classes to its class list, and it's going to add an event list. Now, what we want to do is we want to get that button out of the function. We've built this button in the function. We want to get it out. What's the only way to get data out of a function? If you remember from our function scope talk. And if you said return it, you're correct. So we're going to return that button. So let's look at this now, right? We don't have a button on the screen, right? Because we haven't added anything to it yet. Even though it says append child button, we're not doing that yet. So let's do this. We want to call this function button creator. I'm going to call it. I'm going to open up the console again. Clear that up. So I have this button creator that's going to create a button for us, right? And it's going to return the button. So just like when I said I need to grab a hold of that new button there, I need to grab a hold of what this function returns. So I'm just going to call this const button. And now let's console log this button. And we're going to say console log the product of the button creator function is button. Let's check it out. The product of the button creator function is this button. Cool. So we have used a function to create that button, right? That new component. So then what's the final thing we need to do to get that to appear on the screen? Well, we need to add it to our container, right? And child, and we'll pass that button to there. And now we'll see the button is there. All right, so now we have made our code dry. So let's say button 1 is button creator. And now let's say we want a new button. We can call this button 2. Now, since we call this function the first time, it's going to create a button for us, and it's going to return that button. We call it a second time, it's going to create a brand new button for us and return that button to us, right? They're both going to look identical. They're both going to look the same right now, and we're going to change that in a minute, but let's add them both to the page. And now we'll see. Oh yeah. Should both appear on the screen now. Let's see. Oh, maybe it's because the console's broken. There we go. Okay, so now we have 2 of those components. We can add as many as we want. And in fact, we can do something like this. It'll just add it automatically, right? It'll add it straight to there. Okay. So look, we can start creating as many of these buttons as we want now using this function. Okay. So you're like, well, that's cool, but both of those buttons are the same exact thing. What if I want this to say something else in here? And we got to think about that. So what are some of the things in here that might change, right? What are some of the things in here that we want to be dynamic? First of all, I would say the button text, right? We want this to change. So how do we tell this function to make this button text set to dynamic data? Well, we give it a parameter, and then we would just set it to, let's do that, to the text, right? So whatever we pass in here, we want to set our text to it. When we don't give it anything, we don't have any text in there, right? But let's say we go in here and we'll say, that button component, we want to have the text of this is a button component. So look at that. That one has that text now, and that one doesn't have anything, so we're not giving it any data. Come down here, and we'll say, this is a second component. That's there. And we'll go look at our screen, look that this is a button component, this is a second component. This is a button component, this is a second component, and so on and so forth. And we can create as many of these components as we want. All right. And now look at that. We have this reusable button component that we can plug into anywhere. This, think about it, this very much is standalone, right? It's dry, it's reusable, consists of HTML, CSS sort of, we still need to have that CSS in our CSS file, and JavaScript, right? We have our event listener in there, so that's really the JavaScripty part of it. Single modular pieces of code, and a part or an element of the larger whole. It matches all of our component criteria here. And we can come down here and we can create as many of these components as we want. And we can see that we can do whatever we want to these components. Now, you might think to yourself, what are other ways we can, you know, extend functionality? Think maybe we can have a small, medium, or large button, and we can add small, medium, or large as a parameter, right? We can have a separate event listener for each button. Maybe we have a parameter that takes a function in that calls the click event and that passes that function too. Really, the entire world is at our fingertips. The entire web development world is at our fingertips with components here. So this is our first component creator. Right? We have now created a component that's going to create some buttons for us. Pretty cool stuff. So start thinking about ways that you can use JavaScript and components to create reusable components, pieces of data, and elements that appear on our screen. And now you'll start to see like how things like UI libraries are built and other things like that. And yeah, it's really fantastic stuff that we get to come through here and just make this reusable code. So that's it for this lecture or this video. I'll see you in the next one.